Hey and welcome to the Leniverse. It is the final day of the first week of Fantasy February, although by the time you watch this, it will be the second week of February. On the one hand, it was nice that February started on a Saturday, as it gave me a weekend to kickstart my reading. On the other hand, I forgot very quickly that the week started on a Saturday, and just automatically assumed that I would have another couple of days before the second week would start. And I guess it didn't help that I spent most of that first weekend finishing up January books. Although one of those January books was actually the first book in a fantasy series, so that works. At any rate, it is time for an update, as I am now reaching the end of the Start a Series part of Fantasy February. So that first book that I finished, that I actually started in January, was the first book in the Mistborn series by Brandon Sanderson. That was quite a page-turner. Easily the most readable, or most easily readable book that I have read this week. It has a magic system unlike anything else I've ever read about. It had a good cast of characters, and the plot was basically a heist, although instead of trying to steal money, the heist was actually to steal the throne and to overthrow an immortal tyrant. There were great action scenes. There were a lot of twists and turns. Some of them I managed to work out, but many of them I thought I'd managed to work out, but then they didn't happen exactly the way I expected. And there were also some genuine surprises in there. So all in all, a very enjoyable read. And the second book, Well of Ascension, is definitely going on my continue a series list for next week. The second book I read was The Gunslinger by Stephen King, the first of the Dark Tower books. This was not as quick and fast-paced a read as the Mistborn book, but it's only a little thing, so it didn't take me that long. This is a book that so many people have warned me about. Even people who love the Dark Tower series have been saying how difficult or inaccessible this book is, and to not give up, and to give it to at least try the second book, and that this book is really confusing, and so on. And I have to say, I wonder, did we read the same book? And I realized that maybe we didn't read the same book, because this is the revised edition. And Stephen King writes in the foreword to this book that when he originally wrote The Gunslinger, he was a young man, and he was very much under the influence of writing seminars, and that the result was a fairly pretentious writing style and an excessive use of adverbs. So in addition to, when he revised this book, in addition to adding about 35 pages of material to make sure that future events were properly foreshadowed, and fixing some continuity errors, he also went in and removed a lot of those offending adverbs and basically just cleaned it up a bit. And for that I am very grateful. And I think it wouldn't have been amiss of him to maybe take a look at some of the adjectives as well. That said, I didn't find the book particularly inaccessible or confusing. Do I have questions? Yes, of course, but it is the first book in a 7 or 8 book series, so if I didn't have questions, something would be wrong. I guess it helps to know the information that's written in the introduction about how Stephen King set out to write an epic like Lord of the Rings, but in a different style. So, well, not Lord of the Rings, but a fantasy epic. And it is definitely in a different style. The Gunslinger in this book, he has a series of sexual encounters that would have made Tolkien blush, or maybe curl his lip in distaste. He is also no charming and kind-hearted hobbit. Nor is he Gandalf the Grey. If anything, I guess you could say that he is a bit like... imagine a Strider who, instead of being completely morally uptight, has been under the influence of one of the Rings of Power for a great many years. Yeah, that would be more like it. And in fact, the people that he comes from, like the Gunslingers, They appear to be a fairly amoral bunch, sort of a military caste that have become feudal lords, simply on the merit of being the only people with guns and not being afraid to use them. There was an extended section where they are traveling under the mountain, where I half expected them to run into a golem or a bunch of goblins. They don't, they run into mutants. And for the boy to find an object of power. He doesn't. So, no, whatever King owes to Tolkien is not overt in this book. The other main influence is more apparent. King writes that he saw the spaghetti western, The Good, the Bad and the Ugly, and that's when he realized that he had the setting for his book. And that setting is very apparent. In fact, the first sentence of this book basically describes the whole thing. The man in black fled across the desert and the gunslinger followed. And that's what happens. And we get some like flashbacks, backstory to find out about the gunslinger. But mostly it's a chase across the desert, a long trek with lots of desert landscape and mountain landscape and just landscape. Very cinematic, but not my favorite type of writing. As for the story itself, like I said, I have questions. I also have some ideas and some notions that I would like to talk about. They can't be called spoilers because this is just me guessing and I'm not going into the details of the plot of this book. But still, if you haven't read the series and you don't want to hear about my speculation, then maybe skip to the part of the video where I lower the book again. Okay, if you're still here, good. This is clearly a portal fantasy. It is mentioned several times that there are doorways to other worlds. The world that we are currently in is a post-apocalyptic one. I am guessing that there's been some sort of nuclear war because you have a desolate, devastated landscape and mutated animals and mutated people. And I'm not sure how long ago this is. It's a bit strange. It has similarities to our world. It has Jesus and the Bible. They know about electricity. They can recognize a railway, even though there's clearly none of that running. They have guns. But the gunslinger gets very confused at the mention of like skyscrapers and cars. So there's either a limited overlap or a limited recollection of what the world was like. Could possibly be seen as our world in the far future. But considering all the portals and everything, I don't think we're talking time travel here. I think it's parallel worlds, with the tower as the world tree that connects them all. There are also some hints that the world that they are in here is an afterlife, or perhaps a way station on the way to an afterlife. A character that the gunslinger meets even says as much. He's pretty sure this is the afterlife. The man in black reminded me a lot of the villain from The Stand. It becomes clear that it isn't him, but he seems to have similar powers, and considering that The Stand is linked to the Dark Tower series, I am expecting whatever his name, the villain from The Stand, to make an appearance in some future book. In addition, I wonder if there is a cyclical nature to things. The man in black talks to the gunslinger as if they have been doing this for a long time, this chase, as if it has happened before, or that they have met on more occasions than the gunslinger recalls. And the gunslinger, Roland, also says at one point that I don't understand, or I don't remember that. And the man in black answers, you never do. So that makes me think, I know that a lot of people are unhappy about the way that the Dark Tower series ends. And I have also seen a reading order list that adds in this book again at the end of the entire series. And that makes me wonder if the Gunslinger is actually stuck in a time loop. It would make sense for a battle over the world tree, over the fate of the universe, over the balance of the universe, or the multiverse, for that to be not a one-time thing, but a battle that is fought over and over again. It does seem a bit awful if it's the same players that are fighting the battle over and over again, though. But yeah, that's where I'm at after reading this first book. The title of the next book is also explained, The Drawing of the Three. The Gunslinger will draw 3 people to him, and I look forward to meeting them. Okay, it's safe to listen again. As a final comment, I will just say that I am definitely intrigued. Is it my favorite Stephen King book ever? No. But it seems like a good setup. It is mentioned in the book that it is the end of the beginning, so I basically see it as just an introduction, a staging post. And the Drawing of the Three gets added to continue a series along with The Well of Ascension. And that finally brings me to the trilogy that I started this week. I gave myself 2 options. One was The First Law by Joe Abercrombie, and the other was The Winnowing Flame by Jan Williams. I immediately got 2 offers from people to buddy read The First Law with me, or at least the blade itself, and a third person who said that she would join in as well because she's read it before, but she needs to finish the series. So that made the choice easy. Joe Abercrombie it was. I think the 2 people who haven't read him before, who started it with me, they are regretting their choice, and I don't think they will complete the book, much less the whole trilogy. Me, as of now, I have read part 1 of the book, which is about 40%. I have today to continue it, but it is not that fast of a read, so I will probably have to use some of the weekend as well. As for whether I will continue with it, probably, because I have the whole trilogy and I kind of like it, but it's not, as of now, it is not a priority. I might change my mind once I've actually read the whole book. I think maybe I had too high expectations because so many people have mentioned that book to me and have recommended it and spoken very highly of it. So I probably expected something more than what I got. Because when I started reading it, I felt like I was reading one of those old, D&D books. What are they called? Not Dragonlance. The other ones. I've forgotten. But anyway, it reads very D&D inspired, and well, there's nothing wrong with that, but it doesn't seem in any way unique or that innovative, which I was told that it was. And yeah, I know that it's almost 20 years old now, but it doesn't even seem innovative for the time that it was written. The language is... it's like Abercrombie is trying to be both gross and funny at the same time. And I expected grimdark, so I didn't expect these attempts at humor that fall flat for me, for the most part. It seems almost a bit cartoonish. And the plot also so far seems quite basic. Although, obviously, I'm 40% into the first book in a trilogy, so a lot can happen. The setting is that you have a country, or a union of countries, I think it's called a union, under a king who is senile, and the nobility are completely self-entitled and corrupt. And there's a rising merchant class who are just money grabbing, and everybody is trampling the peasants and the working class underfoot. A few years back, they had a war with an empire to the south, which they won, and they now think that they are indefeatable. But they are already a society in decline. And the south is probably waiting to pounce. In the north, you have tribes of barbarians who have united under one king. Well, they united because he beat them all, and they all hate him, and they are restless, so in order to keep control, he needs to keep them fighting. So he's decided that he wants to take a part of the land that is geographically in the north, but politically belongs to the Union, and it is called England. So England, but with an A. So you have the Union, and you have England, and then you have these like barbarian tribes in the north, and it just made me laugh a bit. Because there's sort of a picture with Vikings and the Roman Empire fighting over England. And I also find it a bit funny now, post-Brexit, that England wants to belong to the Union. Now I'm just waiting to find out if the Southern Empire has anything in common with the Ottomans. Additionally, in the north, there is a group of... I don't actually know if they are human. They are only described through the eyes of the Northmen up there who encounter them, and they have... I don't know if they are just being really racist and they see these other people as subhuman, or if they are actually a different species. It is a fantasy book, so it might very well be a different intelligent humanoid species. But I can't tell, and it bothers me a bit. Also because they call them flatheads, which I believe is a name used for certain Native American tribes. So that just feels a bit weird. But for the rest of it, it all seems really European, and Abercrombie is British, so I'm withholding judgment on that one. So basically, the Union is about to be in a lot of trouble from every direction. Magic has been slowly leaving the realm. The Union used to have this wizard, the first mages, and he left years ago. Actually, he left so long ago that I started to wonder if there were two timelines in the book. I think maybe wizards just live a very, very, very long time. And he's about to return as foretold, and I don't think he's going to be very impressed with what the country has turned into in his absence. Meanwhile, the King of the North has an evil sorceress on his side. So far this seems like a setup to war. And it's not that interesting a setup. And the writing isn't great. Not awful, but just not great. So that brings us to the characters, and here it gets a little bit more interesting. We have this ancient mage guy, who so far has not been a point of view character. We have a nine-fingered barbarian from the north who has this whole Conan the Barbarian thing going on. And he has apparently been like a terrible person with lots of like murder and bloodshed and warfare and just not caring what happens to anybody else and all that in his past, completely ruthless. But now he's old, like over 30, and he has just tired of fighting, and that has made him almost a nice person. Like he has compassion now, and he doesn't want to kill anybody anymore, and he doesn't want to take up the sword, but when he has to, he must, and so on, and he doesn't really care what happens to him. I'm not quite sure I can sort of reconcile his current persona with the past that he is reputed to have had, but I kind of like him. I like the character that he is now, at least. He is relatively interesting to follow. Meanwhile, down in the Union, there is an extremely annoying character who is a young nobleman. He's a captain in the military, which made me think that he had to be like in his 20s at least, but he behaves like he's 17. But he has been in the army for a little while. He's not completely new, but it's not like he's earned his commission or worked his way up to the rank of captain. His commission was bought by his father, so I guess he could be 17, 18. That would explain a lot, and it would also carry with it the hope that he could grow up and become less annoying. Yeah, he's not my favorite. My favorite is The Crippled Inquisitor. He started out like this, the annoying captain, like he was the best duelist of the era and a handsome young man that women swooned over, and he had like a brilliant career ahead of him. And then he got captured during the war with the Southern Empire, and he spent 2 or 3 years in their dungeons being tortured. So now he has a bum leg, almost no teeth, even fewer toes, and limited control of his bowel movements. He is pretty awful, and he is bitter and sarcastic, and I kind of like him. He works out his issues by torturing people for the Inquisition, and at least I can see where he's coming from. He's hardly a likable character, but he's interesting. And of course, he absolutely loathes and despises the young captain for being what he once was and still having that glorious future ahead of him. One thing that bothers me though is why doesn't he fix his teeth? First I thought that he left himself gap-toothed because it makes him extra just gross to people, and he likes to shock people now, to rub it in their faces, his deformity. But he complains about only being able to eat porridge and soup. So why doesn't he get a set of dentures that he can at least use while he's eating? I know that we're in sort of medieval, pre-industrial times here, but I'm pretty sure they had options back then as well. And the way he keeps pulling other people's teeth out, he certainly has enough spare teeth to make himself some replacements. But he doesn't. And that annoys me a lot. Why? And my guess is it's because the author just wants him to be bitter and toothless and just foul in every way. So the whole thing just seems a bit juvenile to me, the humor and the let's be gross and shock people. I am perhaps being a bit too critical right now. I don't hate it. I will finish the book. There are things about it that I like. I guess mostly I am curious because I don't see how the Inquisitor will fit in with the plot. It's what gives me hope that there is more to the plot than just straightforward warfare between the multiple nations. But we'll see. Maybe if I'd just read this book, if that had been the only fantasy book that I read this week, that I would feel more charitable towards it. But since I have read The Final Empire and The Gunslinger, and while I didn't find The Gunslinger to be perfect, I found it to be interesting in a way that the blade itself isn't. And I found The Final Empire to be innovative in a way that I expected the blade itself to be. But still, I have 60% left of the book. I will keep reading it today and for the weekend, and then we'll see. We'll see how I feel at the end of it. Maybe it's just been too long since I read the fantasy trilogy, where the first book is introducing the characters, it's the setup. The second book is putting all the pieces into place, and sadly tends to be the weakest book, which I have to admit, if the second book is weaker than the first, then I will likely stop there. And then the third is the grand finale, the big event and the combat and everything. Yeah, we'll see. But so far, I'm finding it a bit disappointing. So that's it then for Start a Series. That's 3 series started, and next week I'll be reading The Drawing of the Three and The Well of Ascension, and then we'll see. I think maybe between that and finishing the blade itself, that will probably take up most of the week. So that's it for this update. And I'll be back in a week with the Fantasy February Week 2 update.